Okay, welcome to the Hendyamps Rothko demo. This is the full 2U size version. It is a hybrid between a MOSFET setup as well as a tube on the back end. So you've got the MOSFET for the EQ, and you have the 12AX7 style tube on the back end, though you could technically use a 12AT7 in there as well. It would kind of change some of the settings and sound and so forth, but by all means, it definitely works, plug and play. There's also a 1U MOSFET only Rothko. It has most of the options here. It's missing a couple of them, but it's all MOSFET and it's 1U, and it's a really cool unit. The tube one's a little bit different. I wanted to make sure that I did this hybrid approach where you're getting the precision of the MOSFETs and the aggression of the MOSFETs, but I also wanted to have a good tube response that could be exploited on the back end, where you could drive into the tubes when you want to for a kind of a richer, fuller sound. So you're not only getting just a compressor from the Pollock compression portion, but you're also getting compression from the tube itself on the output. And then you add to it the fact that when you're kind of pushing the MOSFETs, you're getting a little bit of odd order harmonics mixed with the even order harmonics from the triode, and you have the makings of a really, really great bus compressor or just a stereo, any kind of compression that you need, whether it be mono, dual channel, whatever. I really, really like this on things like drum bus, master bus. I really like it also on, honestly, anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. I'll take it. This, Pollock, whatever. Just give it to me. I want it. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I'll kind of walk through the controls, and then I have some samples and such that you'll be able to hear kind of what it sounds like in a few examples in action. So you got the bypass switches like normal, and then you have your calibration knobs. You'll notice that these actually have knobs on them as opposed to the Pollock and the Michelangelo, and the reason for that is because with the compression circuit, I really wanted to emphasize that you have full access to these. I realize that they're calibration knobs, but they're technically gain knobs. They kind of gain into the circuit itself. So feel free to push these as you need to. It will affect the air like in the Michelangelo, so the higher these are, the more of a dip you're going to get from this. And the more you pull them back, the more of a boost you're going to get from the air because it's a passive portion of the EQ. It's separate from the rest of the EQ circuit. Anyway, so you have the calibration, which this is going to be generally neutral with trim here. Note that while it's a transformer input, I did do a transformer transformer-less output. And the reason I did that is because I wanted there to be a little bit more interactivity with the gear behind it. So it's fun to be able to crank these and then pull this down or crank it up. And so, for instance, if you have a piece of gear that loads it down a little bit more than normal, then you may have to bump these up, or you have other options that you can choose, or you can bump these up and pull this all the way up. It really just depends what neutral is. For a basic 10K input impedance, kind of the tried and true standard, then this is going to be the general idea of what your knobs and switches will be like in order to get kind of a zero tone or a neutral tone, if you will. But it's extremely interactive and it's extremely fun to use. So going over, we have the low, mid, high, and air, just like the Michelangelo. These switches do the same thing as the Michelangelo. You have your bass and mid and high switches. Same thing with the air and your air switch. Same thing as the Michelangelo. It's all the same. And then over here you have your compression and your wet dry, which is the same from the Pollock. The difference is that a Pollock does not have the EQ engaged in the front of it. This is incorporated into the EQ itself. So the response of the compression from the Pollock and the Rothko is going to it's going to be very similar to a Pollock, but it's going to have some notable differences that I personally love. But it also makes it to where sometimes the Rothko is the slightly better choice because of the way it compresses. It's a little bit more SSL-y, a little bit more grabby on the low end especially, whereas the Pollock is a little bit more invisible. So if I'm trying to go for more invisible type compression, then I'll generally reach for the Pollock. But if I need either EQ with the compression or I want a little bit more grabbiness, then I'll go with the Rothko. Still an outstanding compressor, and you can't go wrong either way because it's very similar to a Pollock. It's just, when I use these on a daily basis, then I see the intricacies of them and so forth. You get your wet dry, the exact same from the Pollock. So this one, what I generally do is I'll dial in the compression that I want, and I know that when I'm dialing in with full wet, it's going to be too grabby, it's going to be too attacky, it's going to be too much craziness happening, but I'm listening for those attack release constants as it's responding, and then I'm pulling this back to dial in how I want it to be applied. It's not a traditional wet dry, but I think it's way more useful than a traditional wet dry, to be honest with you. Okay, and then you have your trim knob. This knob is obviously what it is. So in some setups, you may want it all the way up to calibrate. Some setups, you want it right about here. Traditional is going to be about right there. It's generally where I run it, but again, no rules. Below you have your comp style, so you've got your aggressive smooth. The aggressive on the Rothko is a little bit smoother than the Pollock aggression, and the smooth is a little bit more aggressive than the Pollock smooth. So again, a little bit of a different response on the compressors, but outstanding sound. I also have the 10K plus kind of compression applied, so if you want to do some de-essing on a 10K plus party, then that should be kind of what you're looking for. Okay, now a couple of other little switches in here that are unusual. So one of the things about this is putting the compressor inside of the EQ. I sometimes found myself wanting to increase the drive from the tube, which incorporates the tube into the drive. I realize that sounds kind of weird, but trust me, it makes sense. If I want that output boosted and kind of hit the tube a little bit harder on the output, I'm going to flip that to high, otherwise I'll keep it in low. And then if I want to drive the whole circuit itself even harder than just these, this is more of a straightforward drive, whereas these interact with air and so forth. This drive is actually going to hit everything harder, trigger the compressor harder, and it will kind of change the sonic characteristic of the entire unit. So it's very often that I'm just kind of sitting here like that and pulling the trim down to compensate and just having a blast. But again, it just depends on kind of what you're looking for. And then finally, we have the compressor sidechain. I call this my kicker snare trigger. So if I'm in the normal position to the left, then it's going to pretty much be broadband. Everything gets triggered, which means if your kick drum is hitting like normal, then this is going to trigger more off your kick than it's going to off of anything else. And if I want to get that kick and bass guitar out of the sidechain, I'm going to flip the switch and it's going to focus more on your snare or your roughly 901K and above is what's really going to start triggering it, and it can just really, really be a great application of this compressor to really control that kind of stuff. And overall, that's pretty much what the Rothko is going to be doing. The difference with this one and the 1U only MOSFET version is it has everything that this one has, but it doesn't have these two drive controls because these are a little bit easier to push. And you actually don't need the output as much because you're MOSFET driving MOSFETs, so any drive is going to be a MOSFET drive. And the trim has a little bit more of a oomph to it in the MOSFET version. Also, you don't have the sidechain because I couldn't quite fit it all in there, whereas I could in this one. And then you don't have the 10K plus only, which this one does have. So you in this version, the full normal version, you have MOSFET EQ on the front end driving a tube output with the compressor applied literally in the EQ itself. And so you have the makings of a very cohesive integrated bus compressor. And so, yeah, that's the Rothko.
That's where deals are made. You pay your way, he don't come the same. 'Cause scars never fade that easily.